Hello, and welcome back to still another video. This is the first episode of the story in which Naruto loses his eyes, but his wind affinity reaches to point where he uses wind as sonar system. This story comes from Dental Rush. Kindly support him or her. Like and subscribe to show your support. Let us begin this show. Hyuga Hayashi walked briskly under the rainy night. Despite his utmost celerity, his steps were firm and confident, radiating the strength and authority demanded, from an institution such as the great clan's head. His perennially neutral, if a bit stern, expression showed no hint of complaint towards the raging sky above, flimsily protected as he was from the raindrops by a small dark blue umbrella his cautious daughter had thought of carrying with her. He wasn't the kind of person who said such things out loud, or, at least, he wasn't supposed to be, but he was grateful. Rain, while being a minor inconvenience to most, could be potentially troublesome to Hayashi. Supposed to be the closest thing to perfection in almost every aspect, he was somehow supposed to remain immaculate despite the roaring storm that wrapped the hidden village of the leaf like a mantle of strife. That might be the reason he had chosen a different route to his home that night, as if purposely avoiding other people. Certainly, that muddy, dark street seemed completely devoid of life other than the tall man and his little daughter. How could they possibly know that same dark street and, more specifically, an even darker alley a few hundred feet ahead, had been the scenery for a horrible tragedy? The little girl, Hyuga Hinata, struggled to keep her father's pace. They were in a section of the village she didn't see very often, and she'd have liked to look around a bit. Of course, she wouldn't have been able to see much in the dead of night, in that particularly dark street, with all the rain. In fact, the street was awfully dark. She'd have been more scared if her father weren't walking with her and if tiredness hadn't claimed her, demanding some much-deserved rest. It was quite late. She'd normally be fast asleep in any other day and for quite a while already. While a part of her wanted to beg her father to slow his pace a bit, of course, she'd never do something like that. Her body couldn't wait to be comfortably wrapped under her sheets, sleeping peacefully. It was the 7th anniversary of the defeat of the nine-tailed demon fox. Of course she knew the story. It was the most important historical event of recent times. She knew about the heroic victory of the valiant Yondaime Hokage over the fiendish beast, at the cost of his life, and she understood the importance of such an event and why it was celebrated with a day-long festival. That didn't mean she had to like it. She wasn't against festivals or celebrations, she just wasn't used to such large gatherings of people. Her family's few celebrations were completely unlike that festival. She was used to quiet dinners and stoic reunions where the only reason she wouldn't be bored was because she felt too nervous to. In a family where every waking moment seemed to be a challenge, a test of strength of mind and proper manners, the slightest sign of disrespect would be very regrettable. Certainly, she wasn't used to the things she had seen that evening. Such an explosion of emotions, an almost savage burst of excitement, she had never seen something like that. It was the first time she had assisted to the village's celebration. Apparently, she was of age to start attending events as the Hyuga heir. But she knew she would think about those sights for days to come. The sense of sweat and alcohol had sickened her, and the copious amounts of food had overwhelmed her. Her ears had threatened to burst with the loud music and the cacophony of hundreds of voices. She had eaten so much, she didn't feel too well, but so many people had offered so many different kinds of food to the cute heiress of the Hyuga, and she found it so hard to say no. She always had problems dealing with other people. She couldn't fight against her natural shyness, amplified to superlative levels after the tragic demise of her beloved mother. She felt so small in front of others, so weak that she could only answer with little more than monosyllables. She was forced to face so many different people that night, and the vast majority of them she had never met before. She had tried to at least properly answer all questions fired at her, so she hoped she hadn't embarrassed her father. However, she ended up tired and bored, especially since she wasn't allowed to join the other children, being the heiress and all. She probably wouldn't have even tried approaching them otherwise, anyway. The whole place, The whole village seemed to be infused with energy too intimidating and alien for her. However, she couldn't stop herself from wishing she could have become one with that enthusiasm. It had been an exhausting day, and Hinata couldn't help but be glad it was over. It seemed not even the rain would stop the partying. The people of Konoha would simply seclude themselves in their homes, sheltered from the elements. Some of them would simply ignore the rain, too wasted to mind. While Hinata, and the Hyuga clan in general, didn't approve of such outright barbaric behavior, she guessed the people of the Leaf deserved to celebrate. The Demon Fox had been a tragedy, and its defeat stood as Konoha's greatest triumph after its foundation. It was a day of extremes, a day where they would mourn those who died in that calamitous day and also celebrate the epic defeat of the terrifying demon. Yes, it was a happy day for all but one. Of course, there was no way she could know that, yet. The relentless rain fell upon the two, drowning their steps within its boring cacophony. The sound of their sandals splashing water and carefully avoiding the pools of mud disappeared in the roaring symphony of the falling droplets, an immense curtain of water like nature's arabesque. Torrents of water poured down from the roofs with loud splashing sounds. For an instant, Konoha drowned in light when an irregular white line fell from the sky behind the Hokage monument, and exploded, immediately followed by the mighty growl of thunder. Hinata shrieked. Fortunately, the outside noise hid her shameful display of fear, and clutched her father's robe. Hayashi didn't react in any visible way. Hinata looked up at her father. It had been a while since the last time she had spent a relatively prolonged period of time with him. He had changed. The Hyuga family had changed. In fact, it might have disappeared. It had been almost 2 years since the worst day of her life. Her mother had left, taking the soul of the Hyuga family with her. She wasn't the same since that day, and neither was her father, and it was indirectly affecting the entire clan as a whole. Hayashi's step faltered for a split instant, but long enough for his daughter to notice. A glance at her sire showed that something had caught his attention. With her short stature it was difficult for her to follow his eyes, but she managed to trace the object of his attention, a dark bundle on the ground, leaning against a wall some 20 yards ahead by her left side. What was that? She noticed her father's pace changing to slow, cautious steps as they approached the, whatever that was. It was too big and its shape too aberrant to be a stray dog or cat. For a moment she pondered the idea of it being a trash bag, but her father wouldn't be so cautious when dealing with such a lowly thing. It was right about then when she realized it was a human being. Hinata was puzzled by her father's behavior, as if he expected that person to suddenly grow fangs and attack them. Even if that had been his, because it certainly didn't look like a intention, Hinata seriously doubted he could have been able to take into fruition. Even from a distance, she could see this person was drenched from hair to toes. He looked exhausted to the point of having succumbed and dropped himself on that empty street to be punished by the elements. For a reason beyond her comprehension, Hinata couldn't stop herself from devoting her undivided attention to that small person. Apparently, her interest wasn't disapproved by her father, who seemed to be almost as interested as her, even if his face didn't show it. She guessed such morbid curiosity was unsightly from a Hyuga, but, well, nobody was looking. She still wondered why her father was so intrigued by whoever was sitting on the muddy ground over there. As her eyes focused a bit better and her concentration improved, Hinata was able to figure out a few more things about the mysterious figure. And, the more she saw, the more she wished she wouldn't have. She easily guessed that, from his size, he had to be a child approximately her age. Something clutched her chest the moment she imagined herself in that boy's place. Why was he there? Why wasn't he enjoying the commodities of a house and a warm bed? The boy had his arms wrapped around his legs and his face buried in his thighs. Every single inch of his body was wet, of course. His green shorts were stained with mud, and his golden hair draped down his face like an ugly mop. His shirt she found intriguing. Was it white with dark spots, or dark with white spots? She couldn't figure it out. She had never seen something like that before. It reminded her of some camouflage suits she had seen once, but white wasn't a color she'd seen on those. Whatever it was, the t-shirt was torn in many places, the rain being probably the only thing that ensured the piece of cloth still clung to the boy's body. Much to her surprise, her father stopped when the boy was exactly to their left. Hinata had been so focused on watching the boy that she almost crashed on her father's left leg. She looked up, and she was amazed by what she saw. There was a curious glimmer in his eyes and a subtle change in his expression Hinata barely noticed. The little girl figured it was the Hyuga equivalent of a shocked expression. Hayashi had obviously seen something she hadn't, because she couldn't understand why the kid elicited such a reaction from her father. Hinata looked at the boy one more time. She, too, had recognized the boy, of course. That blonde hair, even if his usual messy hairdo had disappeared courtesy of the raging storm, was unmistakable. She had seen the boy once or twice before. It was that boy everyone seemed to hate. She was shy and quiet, but she wasn't stupid. On the few occasions she had seen the boy, she had also noticed the way he was looked at by everyone else. Hyuga or non-Hyuga, it was as if the entire village had joined in a horrible alliance focused on despising that boy. Hinata couldn't possibly understand the reasoning behind such behavior, but she had quickly forgotten about it, until that moment. She had seen people shouting all sorts of horrible insults at him, people spitting at him, some even threw trash and rocks at him. She didn't know, but he had even been on the receiving end of kunai and shuriken. She didn't understand how people could just do such things and get away with it. Of course, that was because the whole population of Konoha seemed to be one single accomplice. Remembering the boy's sad, unfair and incredible circumstances evoked Hinata's pity. Watching the, apparently, sleeping form of the boy, Hinata was reminded that out there, somewhere, there was always someone faring worse than you. Ever since her mother's death, she had been the object of scorn from the clan council. Hinata, as the heir of the clan, was somehow expected to suddenly grow up and prove herself as a person worthy of the title. She knew she would eventually enter the ninja academy and become a kunoichi, no less could be expected from the future leader of the Hyuga. While she didn't precisely have anything against becoming a ninja, she wasn't sure she had what it takes for such a career. She didn't hate herself, that would come in due time. She didn't dislike her weakness or her natural kindness, it's a part of who she is, the young little girl her mother had loved. But, apparently, the traits her mother had praised and encouraged in her were the same traits the council rejected and found inappropriate in a worthy heiress. It was confusing, intimidating and very depressing, watching the disapproving looks of the main family and, even worse, the disappointed expression on her father's face. She had already been introduced to the family's combat style, Juken, and she had already shown she wasn't the natural taijutsu genius she should have been as the daughter of Hyuga Hayashi. If there was a Juken genius among the youngest generation, it was her cousin Niji. While things weren't precisely the best for her, her self-pity disappeared when faced with the harsh reality of the boy in front of her. Her tiredness disappeared and her expression softened. He was a person she could understand, because she was like him. Even her infant mind knew her situation was nothing compared to his, but she guessed that, in a way, she could understand. However, the sudden awareness of who the boy in front of her was incited a frightening idea in her mind. Had someone done something to him? Had someone hurt him and left him alone under the rain? When she realized the horrible truth, she gasped. She gasped apparently loud enough for her father to hear, because she could feel his strong arm clutching her left shoulder in a way that was almost painful. It didn't matter, she was too shocked and too terrified to do anything. It was blood. The dark stains on his white shirt. It was blood. An unconscious reflex made the girl swiftly hide her tiny body behind her father's legs, peeking at the bleeding figure from a side. She then understood her father's expression. Even the cold and normally expressionless leader of the Hyuga clan was unsettled by the sight of a wounded child. Hyuga Hayashi was many things, but not heartless. Like any parent, for an instant, Hayashi replaced that pitiful boy for his daughter, and the mental image of Hinata in such a state made his blood boil. Needless to say, Hayashi knew a lot more than his daughter. He had easily recognized the blood stains for what they were. He had also, correctly, inferred that the boy had lost a lot more blood than it showed, but it had already mixed with rainwater and disappeared, consumed by the ever-hungry land. He also had a pretty good idea of what had happened and, of course, why it had happened. He knew it was the boy's birthday, and he also knew the boy had the smart, he'd admit, habit of going into hiding that day, as the village's hatred towards him reached its annual peak that day. Apparently, the boy hadn't been fast enough that evening. It troubled Hayashi to admit he wasn't particularly fond of the blonde brat. Like every other family and clan in Konoha, he had lost someone during those terrible days exactly 7 years before. The Hyuga clan had lost many valuable and brave members. Human being as he was, he understood the village's hatred focused on the demon's vessel, even if he didn't fully approve of it. He was aware that the boy was as much a demon as his first daughter was a vicious sadist, but he was also aware of Konoha's need for a scapegoat. The fear, the hatred, the pain and the tears would take too long to disappear. In the meantime, the citizens of the ninja village needed an outlet, a way to release those negative emotions so that they wouldn't consume them. It was a pity that this outlet had to take the form of a small child. Like many others, when the truth behind the Kyuubi's defeat was revealed to the adult citizens of Konoha, the Hyuga clan had demanded the newborn's death. It was Hayashi's and his wife's reasoning which prevented the most emotional members of the clan from openly challenging the Hokage and attempting to slay the helpless child. After all, nobody really knew the workings of the fourth seal, except maybe Jiraiya of the Sannin. What if killing the baby only released the nine-tailed beast? Hyuga Hayashi wasn't willing to take the risk. The fourth was dead, and Hayashi wasn't as arrogant as to believe the Hyuga clan could protect Konoha from the mightiest of all demon beasts. They were a proud clan, but, as much as it pained him, they knew their limits. Very few people can stand to face a bijou and live to tell the tale, and only in legends it's heard of humans defeating such powerful creatures. Hell, most people, Shinobi included, crumble and break down just by experiencing the demon's immense killing intent. This unfathomable fear of the possibility of a second advent of Kyuubi no Kitsune saved the boy's life. Unfortunately, it also turned it into a living hell. However, no Hyuga had ever raised a hand against the boy. If anything, they showered him with glares and scowls, but Hyuga Hayashi and his wife didn't tolerate any violence towards the Kyuubi brat. It was the least and the only thing they could do for him. However, as much as he disliked admitting it, Hyuga Hayashi disliked the boy. It wasn't really his fault though, as it was the case for pretty much everyone else. The boy reminded Hayashi of so much death, sadness and outright terror. True, he protected the boy that night 7 years before, and he knew keeping him alive was the right decision. That didn't mean he was supposed to like it, or like him, for that matter. That's why the Hyuga clan leader was caught in a dilemma. He could tell the kid was still alive. He could also tell that the only reason he was still alive after losing so much blood was probably his tenant. A part of him wanted to take his daughter and resume his walk home. However, the part of him that was once a loving husband, the part of him that loves his 2 daughters, demanded him to do the right thing and ensure the boy's safety. He was a proud and cold Hyuga, but he was also a parent. In his mind, no child, not even the demon's vessel, deserved what the boy was going through in that moment. However, he didn't move. For some reason, he couldn't move. He simply stared in morbid fascination at the still form of the terribly wounded child. He could also feel her daughter's trembling form, and he also knew it wasn't just the cold. Uzumaki Naruto was in a universe of pain. It wasn't the first time he had taken kunai wounds. But it was definitely the first time he had taken so many. He had known for a long time that he was quite resilient to pain, and his wounds were always quick to heal. That was one of the reasons he managed to bear the abuse and hatred of the villagers. It was also the reason he knew he was going to die. Blood no longer poured out of his wounds. Considering the terrifying amounts of blood he had lost, it was to be expected. The pain all over his body had dulled, but that was probably because he could no longer feel his body at all. It was painfully ironic. His body was numb, almost inexistent, but his head felt like it was on fire. His throat was sore. He didn't felt like screaming anymore. He had done that plenty enough, and nobody had shown up to help him, not even the fearsome Anbu which always showed up whenever a person's aggressiveness towards him crossed a certain boundary. That night he'd been completely alone and at the mercy of the crazed predator. He knew he should have locked his house and disappeared in the forest until the next sunrise. That was what he always did on his birthdays. But he had allowed hunger to defeat him. He had stayed too long in the village, hoping to find someone willing to sell him something to eat. He'd pay for that with his life. He was used to the villagers' hatred and abuse. He was used to being kicked out of stores, parks and restaurants. He was used to being overcharged for even the pettiest things. He was used to being called names. He was used to being ignored. He was used to watching parents not allowing their children to play with him. He was used to being thrown things, from rotten food to ninja weapons. He was used to finding his room trashed every single time he tried to give it a semblance of decency. It had happened in the orphanage, and it was happening in the pitiful apartment the old man Sandame had offered him a few months before. Yes, he was used to being the village pariah. And he had long before figured out that complaining, crying or getting angry was only adding fuel to the flames. The bastards reveled in his weakness and his agony, and they were always eager for more. He had also given up on asking why. He had given up on that a while ago, too. He didn't even know why he was the object of such abuse, and nobody would tell him. It made him feel like actually doing something hideous and justify their behavior. At least the old Hokage was nice to him. After 5 years of solitude in the orphanage with the other Kyuubi orphans, the third had offered him a chance at living on his own. Naruto had guessed it couldn't get any worse and accepted. Boy was he wrong. He appreciated what the third did for him, of course. Naruto had so little he knew when to be grateful. The old man made sure he had enough money to afford his measly living, and he also made sure the Anbu controlled the villagers' most violent outbursts. Naruto was grateful, yes, and that is probably one of the reasons he never complained. Naruto didn't want to bother the old Hokage. He didn't want to give old man Sarutobi a reason to hate him. Naruto had refused to cry or complain, that only made things worse. He faced the hatred and the abuse with a mask of silliness and blissful ignorance, and hid the tears deep within his anguished self. He didn't have much. He simply existed, a meaningless existence drowned in darkness. And, that night, the darkness had become awfully real. When hurt, Naruto never cried, screamed or called for help. Not before that night. That night, when caught by the man with the insane eyes and the gleeful smile that dripped demented hate, Naruto's mask of toughness and smiles cracked and became nothingness, to be replaced by true terror. On his 7th birthday, Naruto looked at death in the eyes and, despite being an exemplar of resilience and willpower, succumbed to primal fear. He cannot be blamed for that. He was, after all, 7 years old. He never had a chance, of course. So he screamed, cried and pleaded, first for help, later for mercy, his voice drowned by the harsh rainfall. He screamed at the top of his lungs until he bit his tongue. He took a deep breath and screamed again, until the vicious assailant buried his weapon in his lungs. Then he simply watched the dark sky, his body flinching every single time the piercing weapon stabbed its way through his skin. He felt his mouth filling with blood and ignored the bitter taste of approaching death. He simply watched the sky, the gray clouds briefly turned white by the occasional flash of lightning. Had his brain not been overwhelmed by unfathomable pain, he would have concluded it was the perfect choice for his last visage of the world of the living. It was beautiful, in all its violence. However, his to-be killer wouldn't even grant him that pleasure. He didn't know how long he had been unconscious. He didn't know how he managed to get up and walk out of the dark alley he had been dragged to by his attacker. Leaning against the wall to his left, he made a few weak steps before stumbling on a trash can and falling one last time. He barely remembered shifting his body to the position he was when the two Hyugas found him. As if the forces that be were mocking him, his body refused to give in to unconsciousness again, forcing him to bear with the pain. The hundreds of droplets of water that hit him every second felt like needles on his skin. His head was the worst, the throbbing pain was simply too much. For the first time ever, he actually found himself wanting to die. He was just so tired. He couldn't scream or call for help. His throat was sore and every few seconds or so a trail of blood escaped from the corner of his mouth. Any attempt at speech turned out a weak, pitiful sound. One more, and hopefully last, time he found himself wondering, why? A combination of sensitive senses of smell and hearing plus simple instinctive awareness alarmed to the presence of someone else nearby. Had the crazy shinobi returned to finish the job? No. He didn't feel that horrible, rotten killing intent tainted by alcohol and dementia. It was someone else. But that was of no importance. Whoever it was, he or she was probably enjoying the sight. Oh, well, he might as well face his end with his head up. He wanted to cry, but no tears would come out. The bastard who attacked him had made sure of it. Hinata flinched when the boy's body shook. It was barely imperceptible, but the Hyuga family members are perceptive if nothing else. The two Hyugas had thought Naruto was unconscious. That's because the rain made it impossible to hear his weak groans and whines. However, his slow and uncertain movement alerted them. He had to be aware of their presence. Both Hyugas quickly realized why Naruto wouldn't speak or move or face them. He was too weak, too tired and too hurt to do either. That didn't mean he didn't try. Slowly, very slowly, the blonde raised his face. Uncertain of where to look at, he looked straight in front of him. Not that it made a difference, in any case. Hinata couldn't stop herself. She shrieked, holding to her father for dear life. Her legs had given in. She almost stained her lovely kimono. She wanted to look away, she desperately needed to look away, but the same fear that begged her to run away from that boy as fast as she could stuck her body to that place and her eyes to his face. Hayashi, who had seen his share of atrocities in his life, obviously fared much better. However, the expression on his face would have elicited some quite scandalous comments from the council had they seen him. Naruto's eyes were gone, replaced with two bloody things. Someone had stabbed Naruto's two eyes with a piercing object, most likely a kunai. Like some freaky kabuki makeup, two torrents of blood mixed with rainwater poured out of the two eye sockets. As for the eyeballs themselves, Naruto kept his eyes half closed, protecting their bloody remains from the elements, but his eyelids were just as torn. He had obviously closed his eyes reflexively as the metal tip of the deadly kunai fell down on his orbs. He was looking at nowhere, which Hayashi guessed was obvious. He guessed Naruto had noticed their presence, even if he was unable to see them. He wondered just how that kid was still alive after such abominable punishment. As the leader of a family that values its precious bloodline limit, the sight in front of him was particularly unsettling. Hayashi knew he should have somehow protected Hinata from such a shocking sight. However, she had already seen plenty enough. A part of him acknowledged the girl for staying relatively steady after seeing that. He had expected her to faint on the spot. Hinata was terrified, yet she couldn't stop watching. Her mind immediately pictured herself in Naruto's position, and she felt like throwing up. The idea of someone stabbing her eyes. Her father's strong hand held her before she could fall on her knees. Hinata grimaced at the taste of bile in her mouth. Tears were forming in her, still intact, eyes and threatened to mix with the droplets that fell with renewed intensity. Hinata's extreme sensitivity plus an overly active brain resulted in a stinging pain behind her eyes, as she couldn't stop herself from imagining the agony the boy in front of her was experiencing. If Hinata needed proof of the fact that she is truly a strong girl, she only needed to notice that she was still conscious and not emptying her stomach on the street. A single word escaped her mouth. That was the best and the worst thing she could have done. "Nah, are you, too?" She remembered the boy's name. It was one of those little facts that are shelved in the most recondite depths of the human brain, forgotten until they're suddenly needed. Once again, Naruto's prodigious hearing did its job, particularly augmented by the sudden loss of the most important of the five senses. Naruto heard his name, a faint whisper within the furious cacophony. He liked rainy days a lot, but enjoying that particularly rainy night was proving to be quite the challenge. Ignoring the rain, Naruto slowly moved his head to where he figured the source of the voice was. He had recognized it as a girl's, but he couldn't place a name on it if his life depended on it. Curiously enough, that might just be the case. This is to be expected, since he had yet to meet Hyuga Hinata, the very same Hinata who gasped when Naruto's bloody, lifeless orbs stared at her. It took her an instant to remember he couldn't see her, but that only made her feel worse. Out of some feeling of respect towards Naruto, Hinata refused to look away, as if somehow he could tell. Naruto didn't move. He knew there was a girl in front of him, but there wasn't much he could do with that information. He guessed she was probably pretty grossed out. He, correctly, guessed he looked hideous. But there was one thing he was completely certain of. That girl couldn't help him. However, he was surprised to realize it didn't matter anymore. He was too tired to be desperate, too aching to be sad. Uzumaki Naruto was never an ordinary kid, so it doesn't come as a surprise that he has a different mindset. Truly, in death, he would find peace. So, for that reason, he did the only thing he could do. There was no hope for him, so, for that girl, he would shed his mask one last time. Hyuga Hayashi only blinked. Having been left speechless, he allowed his daughter to be emotional for the two of them. Hinata's eyes widened, and she felt her tiny, fragile infant heart crack and shatter in millions of pieces. Naruto had smiled. And his smile said it all. "It's all right." Naruto was smiling for her. He was trying to calm her down, to soothe her nerves and blow away her fear. He was crossing the boundary of life and death, yet he took his time to comfort little scared Hinata. Something died within Hinata in that moment, and she, as well as her father, but she wouldn't know that, knew something had changed within her, forever. She wouldn't be the same person after that night. She didn't know exactly what had changed or the nature of this change, but she could feel it. Uzumaki Naruto, in the brink of death, had done an immense favor to the Hyuga clan. Maybe that certainty was the trigger for Hayashi to react. Maybe somewhere in the deepest back alleys of his cunning mind, his conscience told him Uzumaki Naruto was way more useful alive than dead. Or maybe he was just too appalled by the sight of the agonizing vessel of the nine tails. A swift hand gesture later, one of his bodyguards, a branch family Chunin, appeared behind the clan head. "Hayashi-sama. Take Hinata to the house immediately, and do not leave her until she's in her bedroom." Hayashi barked swiftly, mildly amused by the way Naruto sought him by the sound of his voice. The kid was a fighter, that he was willing to admit. Immediately. "Hinata-sama." Hinata didn't even have time to complain before the Chunin gently picked her up and swiftly disappeared, carrying her away to the comfort and safety of her house. Hayashi was left alone with Naruto. Of course, there were 3 more bodyguards out of sight, but Naruto had no way to know that. The third will want to know of this. Hayashi said to no one, but he knew one of 3 bodyguards was already gone to find the third Hokage. Lowering his body as well as the umbrella, he reminded himself to make sure Hinata hadn't caught a cold. Hayashi inched closer to Naruto, surprised to see that the boy figured out his position and faced him directly, despite being unable to look at him. "You'll have a debt with me if you make it out of this, Uzumaki Naruto." Much to his surprise, Naruto's face contorted into a smile. It wasn't the same smile he offered to Hinata. This one was almost mischievous. Hayashi didn't notice, but his lips contorted into something remotely resembling a smile. Until that moment, he had decided to aid Naruto for fear of the consequences of his death. However, with much surprise, he realized he wanted that boy to live. Heaven knows why. Carefully picking up Naruto's body, and becoming awfully aware of his malnutrition, Hayashi sped up towards the hospital. Hinata was unable to sleep. She had been thinking about Naruto, replaying the few memories she had of the boy from the few occasions she had seen him from a distance. Unfortunately, these faint memories were always replaced by the horrendous sight she had witnessed that night. Only when in the comfort of her bed had she fully understood the magnitude of what she had seen. She had remembered his eyes. Those impossibly blue eyes, glimmering with so many different emotions. Her eyes, in all their superiority, felt dull and lifeless when compared to the brilliant spark of Naruto's cerulean orbs. His eyes brimmed with energy and enthusiasm she wished she had. She knew Uzumaki Naruto was an orphan. She couldn't understand how someone who had so little, someone whose life was stained with suffering beyond anything she could have imagined, could be so alive. Yes, she remembered those eyes, and she had painfully realized those wonderful eyes might be lost forever. In her 6-year-old mind, that was the greatest tragedy of all. It was a cool, rainy night. The relentless staccato of thousands, millions, of raindrops provided an appropriate, if easily dismissed, company. Sheltered from the howling wind and the raging thunder as they were, the 2 old geezers wondered how people could be outdoors under that inclement weather. They blamed alcohol. On the other side, the 2 old men, reveling in the feeling of warm sake in their mouths, their comfy seats and the warm temperature of the office, felt right in their element. As if sharing a single mind, the 2 men finished their tiny cups of the warm liquor with a single gulp and released content sighs as they felt the sake doing its magic down their throats. The most respected ninja in the hidden village of the Leaf and probably all 5 elemental countries, the third Hokage, gently put the small white cup on the large desk in front of him before looking at his guest. The other man returned the look with the gentle yet cold and calculating smile Sarutobi was well accustomed to. He tried to remember how long had it been since the last time he had seen the other man. At least 3 months. His guest looked exactly as the last time Sarutobi had seen him. As unchanging as a mountain, the Hokage would think. No matter how far backwards in his memories he went, the other man's appearance didn't change in the slightest. 10 years back, 25, 40, not even his first memory of the man, back when he was just a toddler. He vaguely remembered the man, mauve-gray eyes looking down at him accompanied by a smile that was impossible to read. Sarutobi obviously knew of ninja who masked their actual age by less than ordinary means. He didn't have to think too hard to remember his moody and very endowed, talented female student, Tsunade of the Sannin. Of course, Sarutobi was also aware that the circumstances of the man in front of him were quite different from Tsunade's. Besides, Horazen Shiki was much older than Tsunade. Much older than Sarutobi himself, in fact. Only Horazen Shiki knew Horazen Shiki's age. "I like it when my wife stares at me like that, but you're just scaring me, Saru." "Okay, him and his wife." The third Hokage scowled. "Quiet, you." Scowling is not an acceptable expression coming from a Hokage. "I can't imagine the councils." Reaction to such a sight, or its effects in the village's morale. Horazen Shiki has a very difficult sense of humor. That Sarutobi knew decades ago. But, truly, the Hokage was amazed by Shiki's youthful appearance. It was as if his aging had stuck on the 15-years-old mark and refused to move on. However, there were a few odd details here and there. His short black hair lacked luster, and it was obvious that Shiki didn't comb it as often as he should. He could also see a few white hairs here and there. His skin was sickly pale and showed that Shiki either spent too much time indoors or his body was simply incapable of producing the necessary melanin to give his skin a healthier tone. For a man who had taken the path of eternal youth, he didn't seem to be very mindful of his appearance. Even his clothes were the same. Apparently, Horazen Shiki only possessed one single set of clothes. Sarutobi could close his eyes and his mind would easily visualize the outfit with remarkable detail. He easily remembered the combination of dark blue long cheongsam, which apparently is the Horazen family's trademark choice of clothing, with Shiki's very own version of the standard Konohagakure Chunin vest. He remembered the knot buttons arrayed at the cheongsam's right side and the two tall side slits that allowed Shiki to reach his two-leg holsters wrapped around the black pants he always wore. He remembered Shiki's vest only had patches for scrolls on the right side, but the amount of those was ridiculous, as if to make up for it. In fact, it seemed as if the male named Shiki carried nothing but paper. The two-leg holsters, one per leg, where shinobi normally store kunai and shuriken, were full with what at first glance seemed like prayer strips. On the left side of his jacket, instead of the scroll patches, there was a wide, white vertical band that traveled all the way from the shoulder to the waist. On this band there was a pattern of solid and broken black lines. More precisely, there were 3 broken horizontal lines, a gap, and 3 solid horizontal lines, trigrams. If Sarutobi remembered correctly, the 3 broken lines were the field trigram, and the 3 solid lines were the force trigram. However, Sarutobi had to admit, there was a good reason for Shiki's clothing's utter lack of variation, a reason he had come to understand and acknowledge after knowing the ever-young man for decades, the same reason Horazen Shiki's name was known throughout the elemental countries, the same reason there was a page dedicated to him in the bingo book despite not being a particularly spectacular shinobi. As a matter of fact, in the strictest sense of the word, Horazen Shiki isn't even a shinobi. Seriously, old monkey, you're scaring me. The Hokage snorted and looked back at the always growing, never disappearing stack of papers that littered his ridiculously large desk. The ravages of age weighed heavily on him, especially on that day. He had to leave the festival grounds when tiredness conquered him. The rain had nothing to do with it. Nothing at all. His old, tired body wasn't fond of large, noisy crowds, not anymore. Hence, he had returned to the relative calm of his office, where he could lose himself in his thoughts. For a while, at least until the following day, he wasn't Sandaime Hokage. He was just a tired old man lost in his memories. The sounds of the harsh rain outside made for a depressing yet welcomed company. The celebrations weren't something out of the ordinary. It was just like any other festival in any other town. In that aspect, the hidden village of the Leaf wasn't any different from any other town. Stands of food, games and things to buy stood all over the place. Children ran and played ninja wearing fake ANBU masks. Adults shared stories, laughed merrily, ate traditional foods and drowned in alcohol. The village's security was frighteningly lax on that day, but not even the Hokage could deny his shinobi the chance to enjoy what might be Konoha's most notorious holiday. Not even the celebration of Konoha's foundation incited such revelry from his fellow villagers. So, he decided to deal with some paperwork before going to bed. However, working had proven impossible when the memories of many years of tragedies, bloodshed, mistakes and failures muddled his mind. The rain lost its soothing appeal and it reminded him of the state of his mind. Shiki's arrival had been a welcome change. Especially when the non-nin, a ridiculous title Jiraiya had conceived way back when he was a genin, offered a bottle of high-quality sake. However, he felt the need to return to his work. He was painfully aware that, should he not do so, the pile would grow to twice its current size by sunrise. When he picked the top page on the pile, Shiki offered him a look of false pity. Ah, paperwork, the bane and torture of political leaders everywhere. I do not envy you, Hokage-sama. If you aren't going to help, then please don't be a bother, Horazan-sama. Sarutobi barked, mentally wondering why he was acting like such a child. It was unsightly, and unusual, coming from him. Even the tone he had used to address his guest reeked of childish spite. Shiki took half a minute to calmly finish his sake before speaking again. I'll help. The Hokage's hand that held his good old faithful stamp froze in the air, denying the small object its divine right to seal its 50,000th paper. What did you say? Shiki stood off his ample and comfortable seat to stand next to the Hokage, randomly grabbing another paper from the top of the pile and studying it with an uninterested gray eye. I said I'll help, that is, if there's something I can do. Both Hokage and Horazan knew the answer to that. Sarutobi would have loved to have Shiki in Konoha's council, if only for his intelligence and his loyalty. The old Hokage's wrinkled face contorted into a smile as his left hand patted Shiki's back. You are a good friend, Shiki. Shiki raised an eyebrow. I insist, Saru, I'm married. Been married for a long time. Sarutobi moved his hand away, as if flinching after touching hot coals. Be quiet. So, they worked in a relatively quiet demeanor for at least half an hour. Sarutobi couldn't help but be pleased with the fast pace at which they progressed, yet another testament of his temporary assistant's intellect and efficiency. It reminded the old Hokage of just why he appreciated Shiki's friendship and how much he respected the famous non-nin. He had to admit, the name kinda stuck. Shiki's company brought him fond memories of his younger days, when the two would spend hours together talking about their favorite and obligatory topic of discussion whenever they met, jutsus. Shiki would show him a jutsu, and they would debate jutsu theory and the intricacies of chakra manipulation until their voices, minds, and bodies succumbed to exhaustion. A few days later, Sarutobi would show how far he had progressed with the jutsu, and he'd then follow with a lengthy discussion on possible modifications, improvements and applications of the technique. Sarutobi had taught Shiki as many jutsus as Shiki had taught him. Shiki was having similar thoughts. The third Hokage was one of the very few people he actually admired. The amount of jutsus the legendary professor had accumulated in his lifetime was simply astounding. Not just that, Sarutobi fully mastered each and every single of his techniques. He had adapted each and every single jutsu he learned into a strict, complex and utterly effective combat style, an amalgam of taijutsu, genjutsu and ninjutsu that became the bane and terror of young and old shinobi everywhere. He truly understood the subtle complexities of molding, shaping and manipulating chakra, a knowledge the awfully convenient Sharingan cannot match. The third had become a walking encyclopedia of ninjutsu through sweat, blood, tears and an unyielding determination, and Horazan Shiki had been witness to it all. That's why Shiki admired him, for that and many more reasons. That's why it pained him to see the Hokage's tired expression that night. Shiki knew that, while Sarutobi's mind might be focused on the paperwork, his heart and soul were lost. So, it's been 7 years. Yes. The old Hokage responded, his voice barely above a whisper. The memories of that night still make me shiver. It wasn't a lie. Shiki had almost lost everything that was dear to him, as well as his life. Or, at least, the fake mockery of existence he called life. Welcome to the club. Sarutobi muttered bitterly. You keep blaming yourself. It wasn't a question. It was a pathetic truth, and Shiki's voice reflected his disagreement and disappointment. However, the unsettling weight of their uncomfortable silence was slashed apart by Sarutobi's hand slamming the desk. "Damn it, Shiki, it should have been me." "The third." Hokage roared. Shiki's calmness clashed with the turmoil of emotions that flared within the Hokage. His small, dark, bead-like eyes flickered with a flame neither Shiki nor anyone else had seen in him for quite a while. It was truly a shame the flame was returning for all the wrong reasons. Hence, Shiki tried to appeal to the Hokage by the means of his favorite, if rarely useful in these situations, weapon, logic. You know that was simply impossible. The hack no Fuin Shiki was developed basically on the run. We were lucky we actually managed to come up with the stable lattice frame combination with Shirsho Fuin, for symbol seal, to imprison the Ninetales. There wasn't time to teach the complete sealing procedure to anyone else. Besides, 7 years ago you were already too old. You wouldn't have been able to pull it off. And you know I couldn't do it either. Jiraiya? I'm not sure. Your bland reminders of my uselessness are the last thing I need right now. Sarutobi growled, the exact same tone he had used so many decades before to complain when his two mentors grinded him, to the brink of chakra depletion and muscular paralysis. The truth hurts. Live with it, it had to be done. It was Sarutobi's turn for his eyes to narrow. You tell me the exact same words every year. Maybe because it pisses me off, watching how you let some unfounded guilt consume your life. The Hokage hastily finished the few drops of sake he had left forgotten for too long and dropped his cup on the desk rather harshly. Shiki winced, wondering if he would have to replace it. Is that why you came here? Because, in that case, Shiki. You think I came here out of pity, Saru? I thought you knew me better than that. Sarutobi scowled. Bastard. Shiki sat on the sturdy desk, looking down at Sarutobi with his usual neutral gaze. The Hokage released a deep, tired sigh, and returned the document he had been holding back to the to-do pile. No matter how much he wanted to, he knew he wouldn't be able to get any more work done. Not that night. He was great. It didn't take a great intellect to infer who Sarutobi was talking about. He was Jiraiya's student. And I did teach him a thing or two. So did you, if I'm not mistaken. He was a great shinobi. He died protecting the village. He gave his very soul to save the people and the home he loved. His honor and selflessness was admirable. While honor and selflessness aren't virtues I particularly approve of in a ninja, Shiki declared. As an excellent human being, he is worthy of our respect and admiration. Konoha needs a leader like him. You are a good leader, Saru. I was a good leader, Shiki. I was forged and tempered in war, and at the time I'm proud to say I did a damn fine job. But my time has passed, and don't you dare say otherwise. Shiki remained silent, and Sarutobi felt the awkward need to explain his reasoning. My body's tired. I move too much, my bones ache. I stay seated for hours, my bones ache just the same. My mind's not as lucid as it was. My reflexes are lacking. I can't hate myself for it, I know it's normal. I'm surprised I've made it to my 63rd year. Shiki, I don't want to be here anymore. Among the great 5 hidden villages, the Sandaime Hokage was the Kage who had wielded the title the longest. Shiki couldn't blame Sarutobi for being tired of the job. Being Kage is far from an easy position. He could understand Sarutobi being tired of the tension, the intrigue, the deaths, the relentless strife and the never-ending, ever-lurking threats from every direction, both inside and outside Konoha. However. Shiki murmured. But I know there's nobody around who could replace me. Actually, there is, but he'll get this seat over my dead body. The Hokage declared, slamming his right fist against the desk for emphasis. Shiki snorted. He had a very good idea who Sarutobi was talking about. But the old professor wasn't done. And the one thing I have done right, I still don't know what I should have done. I take it we're talking about Uzumaki Naruto. Dark brown eyes met mauve, and it was as if the world around them reflected their age. Sarutobi Sandaime Hokage had never looked so old. I couldn't give him the life he deserves. You and me neither, Saru. But you know that isn't your fault either. I can tell them what to do, but I cannot shape their feelings, right? Sarutobi concluded, the same conclusion he had used for the last 7 years in a sad attempt at finding relief. Shiki only nodded. You should be grateful you have loyal Shinobi and Kunoichi. I am, Shiki, I really am. The two men sighed together, raised an eyebrow together and chuckled together when they realized they were acting like old ladies. It didn't last long, though. The emotions that waited in the Hokage's heart made that impossible. Their expressions slowly shifted to half-grins, and Shiki refilled their cups with more warm sake. So, old monkey, how is he? Who? Shiki scowled. Who do you think? Naruto? Do I care about anyone else in this stupid village of yours? What about the Hyugas? Those are different circumstances. So, how is he? Sarutobi let a sip of warm sake run down his throat before replying. Same as always, I guess. Did I tell you he moved out of the orphanage? Really? Shiki closed his eyes, reveling in the sweet taste of sake. He'd never get tired of it. Never. No reaction? Nothing worthy of note regarding. Not at all. Other than the minor physical features you already know about, he's growing like an ordinary child. Yet he lives as Konoha's scapegoat. An uncomfortable silence followed. The torrential downpour made for an interesting background theme. It would be a cool, comfortable night, if a bit tempered in water. Konoha's muddy streets would be impossible nuisances the next day. Shiki had a pretty good idea of what went through Sarutobi's head, so he wisely chose to leave the old Hokage to his depressing musings. He was in no hurry, he'd wait until Sarutobi chose to speak again. And eventually he did. How's your wife? Shiki acknowledged the abrupt change of topic with a cold smile. I think she's working on a new scroll. Another one? Shiki shrugged. Someone has to. Sarutobi chuckled bitterly. Why was it that everything triggered a sad memory that day? I'll look forward to it, I guess. Their musings were interrupted by the familiar sound associated with the use of Shunshin no Jutsu. There was someone behind the office's door and, whoever it was in a hurry. A knock on the door and a word from Sarutobi later. A young man dressed in the standard Chunin uniform entered the room with lots of noise and little fanfare. Hokage-sama. The Hyuga Chunin's white lavender eyes easily caught notice of the second presence in the room, recognizing Urazen Shiki immediately. Only the youngest among the revered clan wouldn't recognize Urazen Shiki at a glance. However, the Chunin was well trained, and the distraction provoked by Shiki's presence lasted but an instant. Hokage-sama. Hyuga Hayashi-sama has requested that you be informed of an assassination attempt on Uzumaki Naruto. Ninja are trained to conceal their emotions, never letting them stand in the way of their objectives. They have enough obstacles as it is. Shiki beat Sarutobi this time. His only reaction was the twitching of his right eye. The way the third Hokage slammed his hands on the desk, added to the silent warning glance aimed at the unfortunate messenger, cued the Hyuga Nin to describe what he had seen. Once again, the Chunin showed he had been properly trained. He had to use the least amount of words possible. Time is of the essence in the ninja business, but he also carefully measured each and every single one of his words. Everyone knew of Sandaime's feelings towards the demon vessel. Incorrect wording on his part would put him and the Hyuga clan in a very bad position in front of the most important ninja in Konoha. Having Urazen Shiki of all people as witness would only make things worse. Hayashi-sama is carrying Uzumaki-san to the hospital as we speak. The Chunin couldn't restrain from releasing a long sigh once he was done. He wasn't used to those kinds of situations. Sarutobi and Shiki shared a glance. The hospital. The latter murmured, and the Hokage easily interpreted his expression. The hospital wasn't the best place for Naruto, especially not that night. Any better ideas? Shiki raised an eyebrow, eyeing Sarutobi as if he had said the stupidest thing. The Sandaime easily caught the gesture. You think she'll do it? She has to. Shiki declared. Call your ANBU, tell them to escort Hayashi-kun. Who's in charge tonight? Itachi. Shiki made a grimace, as if he had just tasted something awful. Ugh, whatever, just. Call him, I guess. The third Hokage made a sequence of 3 hand seals, followed by very quiet whispering. Shiki recognized the seals as Sasayaku Kaze no Jutsu, a futon jutsu that allows one-way communication over relatively long distances. With the advent of wireless communication technology, the use of that jutsu had declined notoriously, to the point that few shinobi even bothered learning it anymore. However, Sarutobi was aware that there were few select occasions when Sasayaku Kaze was clearly more useful than its technological equivalent. I have instructed Itachi-kun to intercept Hayashi and take him and Naruto to Training Area 69. The Hokage declared after a few seconds. In every official record, Training Area 69 was declared to be the ruling Hokage's private training grounds, a flawed description by itself, considering the fact that a Hokage rarely has time to do any training, and as such labeled as off-limits to anyone but the highest-ranked shinobi of Konohagakure no Sato. Only a few selected high-ranked individuals in the hidden village were aware that Training Area 69 was, in fact, the Urazen family grounds, another flawed statement, as it's rather pretentious to call the 2 sole inhabitants of the Urazen residence a family. The fire in Sarutobi's eyes flickered in a furious if short-lived flare. For a split instant, Shiki saw a pale shadow of the one who had been named the God of Shinobi. How did that happen? Sarutobi asked, more to himself than to anyone else. It was a very good question, actually. Naruto wasn't liked by the citizens of Konoha. That was a fact. Most Konoha ninja, even those who hated Naruto, were smart enough not to act against him, aware as they were of the Hokage's feelings towards the boy. While most of the ninja saw Naruto as an ordinary kid, with a terrifyingly powerful demon sealed within him, those who disliked him didn't do more than the occasional hateful glare and harsh words. The citizenship was a bit more direct. The hatred of those who had fought the Nine Tails and their families couldn't compare with the hatred of those who, unable to protect their city, their lifestyle and their loved ones, wordlessly and hopelessly watched how the mighty demon fox sowed destruction in its wake and killed those they held dear. When the truth about the Kyuubi's defeat and sealing was revealed, the citizens of Konoha had claimed for the newborn Uzumaki Naruto's death. When it became clear it was not going to happen, they attempted to claim justice with their own hands. When it appeared that the baby had the protection of the Sandaime Hokage and more than one important family, namely the Inuzukas and the mildly reluctant Hyugas, they relied on the next best alternative. Hating Uzumaki Naruto with a passion. While most didn't do more than ignore and avoid the kid, flinching, glaring, cursing and spitting the ground in his presence, some acted a bit more aggressively, basically bullying him in a way remarkably similar to what someone would expect in a civilian school. Everything within the boundaries of non-outright violence. The last thing they needed was getting in trouble with the authorities because they went too far abusing the demon brat. Merchants acted as if Uzumaki Naruto didn't exist, ignoring him until he gave up and disappeared, or using some half-assed excuse to deny him their services. They had the right to do so, after all. Some had thrown rocks at him. Those were quickly dealt with by both ANBU and the military police. Some members of the Uchiha Corps were prone to paying little attention to aggressions towards Uzumaki Naruto, though. In two separate occasions shuriken and kunai had been thrown at him. Both cases involved inebriated civilians who had somehow gotten their hands on ninja weapons. In conclusion, outright violence aimed at Uzumaki Naruto was scarce, if nigh inexistent. The occasional assassination attempt was rooted out and contained before it even came to fruition. Yet someone had somehow succeeded. Sarutobi knew he couldn't keep an eye on Naruto 24/7. The sole idea was fundamentally impossible. He couldn't waste resources, namely, his valuable ninja, to bodyguard a child, regardless of the child's importance. He tried to have the ANBU watch over Naruto as often as possible, but, then again, constant supervision couldn't be afforded. It was a tragedy, but, Sarutobi correctly guessed, it wasn't really that surprising. The aftermath of the Kyuubi's attack and the subsequent life of one Uzumaki Naruto had showed him that Konoha wasn't exactly the haven of peace, tolerance and respect he had hoped it would be. He had been painfully reminded that, beyond anything else, Konoha was a ninja village. In a way, they were as ruthless as their allies and enemies. No, Sarutobi wasn't surprised. He was furious, though. I knew it would be a long night. The old Hokage concluded before turning to Shiki. Help me with this. I'm already doing it, but, I'm not one of your loyal shinobi. Sandaime growled and cursed under his breath. B-rank mission payment only if you find the criminal. Shiki's smile never reached his eyes. It's an honor and an immense pleasure, being your friend, old monkey. His words were followed by drawing blood off his tongue and a familiar sequence of hand seals. Kuchios no Jutsu. Two identical and relatively small puffs of smoke revealed the appearance of Shiki's faithful companions. A black spot swiftly lunged at Shiki, climbing until it rested with its head and front paws over his right shoulder, and its back legs and rump supported under Shiki's right arm. Two identical black tails wagged happily from side to side. For the first time that evening, Shiki revealed an honest-to-God warm smile. Sorry, no time for playing right now, Chen. He looked down at the second two-tailed black cat, who returned the look with an eager expression. Shin, dear, this kind Hyuga lad will take you to the scene of an assassination attempt on Uzumaki Naruto. The cat's eyes narrowed. Is he? He's alive. Please revise the scene and find any clues and trails that would lead to the attacker. Aye, Shiki-sama. That goes to you, too, Chen. The cuddly cat only purred and rubbed her face against Shiki's right cheek. Hyuga, Sendai, right? The Chunin blinked in utmost surprise. Horizon Shiki was proud to know the name of every single Hyuga. Please guide Shinchan and Chinchan to where Naruto-kun was found. Sendai blinked and shot an uneasy glance at the Hokage, who nodded briskly. Yes, sir. Despite his reputation, Shiki had no authority over Konoha shinobi, or any shinobi, for that matter. The Chunin and the two-tailed cats gone in a burst of speed, the two old men looked at each other. Don't say it. Don't say it's not my fault. Let's just go, I have work to do. It took Shiki a few seconds to follow the Hokage after he disappeared, wondering if maybe, just maybe, something good could come out of this whole ordeal. The furious flicker of the old Hokage's eyes was a good sign. Horizon Saya knew that, when her days in the world reached an end, she would be remembered for many things. She knew she would be remembered for being the person who took some loose advanced notions of chakra control, added incomplete knowledge of anatomy and physiology, worked around these concepts, completed what needed to be completed, and created a whole new art. Sure, her apprentice Tsunade had taken that art, broken all its boundaries and driven it to levels of expertise beyond Saya's wildest imagination, but she still had the honor of being the mother of medical ninjutsu. Tsunade might have surpassed her a long time ago, but that doesn't make her any less skilled. She would also be remembered for the nickname everyone used for her. Just like her husband was Hyakuman Fuin no Shiki, Shiki of the Million Seals, she was Chiyu Igeo no Saya. Saya of the Healing Smile. She didn't really care about nicknames, but it surprised her that her nickname was related to her medical developments. Her conception of medical ninjutsu had been a minor project that suddenly became something immense. She would never admit it, but it had also been sort of an accident. In any case, medical ninjutsu wasn't really her main interest among the ninja arts. She was the most prolific writer of treatises on the topic, though, but that's because Sarutobi's lazy, alcoholic, gambling-addicted student wouldn't bother. Tsunade had so many more things to write about, so much more knowledge to share with the world, but no, Saya's medical scrolls had to suffice, while medic neens everywhere could only dream of the day the great Tsunade bothered to share her unmatched expertise with someone, anyone. There were rumors she had an apprentice, though. But Tsunade was the kind of once-in-a-lifetime talent that should share her incredible gift with the whole world. When Saya asked why her nickname wasn't related to what she was really good at, the world complied and gave her another nickname. Taijutsu no Amatsukami, the heavenly goddess of Taijutsu. Taijutsu was her hobby, her passion, her obsession, closely followed by her addiction to strawberries and her love of plants and flowers in general. As such, she was proud to claim she was one of the greatest taijutsu masters of the world, if not the greatest. Of course, her genjutsu was just below average. That's what she gets for being a genjutsu specialist yet never working on that, and her ninjutsu was reduced to techniques that reinforced or complemented her taijutsu styles. She knew absolutely nothing about seals, that was her husband's job, after all, but she was pretty decent with weapons. Not as good as she'd have liked to be, but she preferred her bare hands and feet, after all. Yes, she didn't really care about nicknames, but she had to admit that she got lucky on the nickname department. Her nicknames were passable, at least when compared to Slug Princess, Legendary Sucker, Super Pervert, or Toad Hermit. She wondered if that was the reason Orochimaru didn't have nicknames other than Snake Sannin. Sure, she had heard people addressing Orochimaru in other ways, but those weren't really nicknames, more like very, very nasty insults. She'd also be remembered by the names that were directly associated with her, the names of those who had been inspired or aided by her teachings, famous shinobi who had in turn made names for themselves. Tsunade was by far the most famous name, as well as one of the most recent. Few people knew that the Nidaime Raikage had been her apprentice. Chiyo and Ebizo of the Sand had also learned a thing or two from her. She aided the third Kazekage in developing a taijutsu style he called use in combination with his iron sand. She had helped in the development of the Hyuga clan's Juken style, which is kind of funny, considering she can't use Juken herself, and she introduced Mato Gai to the 8 celestial gates. She had absolutely nothing to do with his unique personality. Really. Truth be told, Saya loved teaching. Unfortunately, the problem resided in finding people worthy of her instruction. Yes, Horazon Saya would be remembered for many things. In anybody bothered to ask her, though, she would say she only wanted to be remembered for one single thing, being a loving and devoted wife. It was one of those little facts about her that nobody knew or even cared to know anymore, just like her maiden name being Haruno. Of course, it had been a very long time since she had last used that family name. Shiki was the one thing she loved more than strawberries and taijutsu. Lots more. He was her driving force, the stimulus that made her grow into a warrior strong enough to wipe the floor with any shinobi and kunoichi under Kage level. She was his partner, companion, bodyguard, wife and soul mate, the only person who could understand her, just like she was the only person who could understand him. He was the person who kept her mind from succumbing to the endless abyss of dementia. Even then, so late at night, she sat calmly on the wooden planks on the entrance of their small house, which, as she always painfully remembered, was strikingly similar to the Hyuga residence, waiting for her husband to return. She felt lonely and abandoned in the darkness, but she patiently waited with a cup of warm strawberry-flavored tea in her hands. It was her sin, paying outrageous sums of money to import the delicious refreshment from Snow Country. She mindlessly smoothed the wrinkles on her plain cerulean yukata, one of her many quirks and habits consequence of a mind ravaged by age. Then she caressed her cheeks with her right hand, to make sure her skin was still smooth and flawless, secretly afraid her appearance of a girl caught in eternal puberty would suddenly disappear and her true self would be revealed to the world. She knew that wasn't likely to happen, but her slightly demented psyche wouldn't let go of the idea, apparently forgetting that, should she suddenly change into a form more appropriate to her real age, she would become a pile of dust. She had watched the fireworks from a distance. Her mind, prone to making wild turns and trailing through pointless thoughts for no apparent reason, reminded her of the Hyuga family's second child, Hanabi. Fireworks. Then she remembered Hanabi's mother. And then her tea wasn't as tasty anymore. Fuck. She growled. An unusually strong gust of wind was the world's response, as if not approving of such a lovely and melodious voice using such a dirty word. Trying to follow a different trail of thought, she remembered the reason Konoha celebrated that day. She still couldn't understand how anyone could celebrate that day. It was one of the things in her famous list reasons I think the people of Konoha are idiots. Sometimes she felt like going on a rampage in Konoha. She'd be able to wreak a lot of havoc before she was taken down. Unfortunately, such an action, beyond its blatant stupidity, was obviously against the rules, the same rules that prevented her from beating the crap out of any annoying ninja that stood in her way. Orochimaru came to mind, even if she wasn't sure she could actually defeat Orochimaru of all people. Besides, her husband always stopped her before her desire to do good deeds in an overly violent manner took over her. He often did it in very pleasing ways, so she didn't mind. She still had a nasty scar on the left side of her chest, where the nine-tailed demon fox had clawed her and sent her flying for, 2 miles. She still thought it was a miracle she had survived that night. She guessed she owed it to her wonderful husband, and also to Hatake Kakashi and Mato Gai. She had been surprised when she realized the nasty wound would never heal completely, leaving a just as nasty scar. She guessed it was to be expected, given the properties of the damn kitsune's chakra. Besides, the scar had its good side. For some reason she couldn't conceive, not that she gave a damn, the feel of Shiki's tongue trailing the blackened skin was beyond fantastic. Saya had to squeeze her legs together and look for something else to think about. She was getting dangerously excited. So, she waited, patiently, for her husband's return. She knew exactly where he was, chatting with the Sandaime Hokage over a few cups of sake, remembering the old times and catching up on the latest events in Uzumaki Naruto's life. She would have joined the two old men, but she had felt like sitting down to quietly watch the rain and drink lots of strawberry-flavored tea. She made a mental note, she was running out of her precious. In all honesty, she was starting to regret staying in the house. There was a limit to how long she could stay doing absolutely nothing before going insane. Oh well. She said to herself. I guess he will have to make up for it. A notably demented smirk coated her face when she thought of what, she hoped, they would do when he returned. She was about to indulge in her, mildly, depraved fantasies when a tingle in her head alerted her. Someone had stepped within their barrier and rapidly approached. She had visitors. Of course, the huge barrier that surrounded the Horizon family grounds wasn't meant to prevent access, only to warn the Horizon couple of the intrusion. It didn't inform of the intruder's identity, so they had to be ready for anything. The barrier was only attuned to Shiki and Saya, so that they would know when the other was approaching home. Unfortunately, the Hakapo Fuin Kekai hadn't recognized her husband's chakra signature, which meant her visitors were of the unexpected, and unwanted, sort. Fuck again. She growled. She closed her eyes, not even opening them when she heard the sound of 4 pairs of feet touching the grass 12 yards in front of her. My, if I had known I would have so many visitors, I'd have prepared more tea. Horazan-sama. A stern adult voice took her by surprise. That person she didn't expect. Era, Hayashi-kun. She said as she opened her eyes. What a pleasant sir dash, she never finished the sentence. She had seen the boy in Hayashi's arms. She had also noticed the two Branch family bodyguards behind him and the raven-haired Anbu wearing a fox mask, of all things. Saya-sama, I don't want to hear it. Follow me. She stepped out of the porch, her clothes immediately drenched by the torrential downpour. In any other situation she'd have made a joke about the show she was offering to the four shinobi, but even she knew when to keep her loose mouth shut. Her mind, unfortunately, wasn't as easy to control. She found herself wondering why Hayashi always did that when addressing her. He called her by her last name the first time, and from then onwards he used her name, as if the first time were some sort of request for permission to call her Saya-sama. It was curious. She also wondered why Itachi had picked a fox mask. She wondered if that was his twisted form of humor. While she didn't share her husband's open dislike of bloodline limits, she had to admit the genius Uchiha made her nervous. Anyone with the power to trap her in an illusion so easily was too troublesome to be relaxed around. Of course, she knew more than one way to fight against the damned Sharingan, but those bloody crimson eyes were always a hassle that freaked her out. The Horazan family grounds consist of 3 houses and a greenhouse forming the 4 vertices of a rhombus. Between the 4 structures laid a main garden where Saya indulged in her hobby of raising seasonal crops. The forest clearing around the houses was littered with thousands of flowers of dozens of different kinds. Once again, Saya's idea. Beyond the flower field, only wilderness. Saya guided the 4 Konoha shinobi to the rightmost building, which housed the dojo and Saya's personal study room. She entered the dojo and made a gesture for the men to follow her. She shot a glance at the blond boy. He was unconscious. If it weren't for the mess he had become, Saya would think he was sleeping. She looked at the floor, and the muddy, wet trail their feet had left on her floor. She mouthed a third fuck before walking to the furthermost corner to their left. Itachi was the first to notice the unusual U-shaped handle on the wooden floor. Saya pulled it up and revealed a set of stairs that descended into unfathomable darkness. Before going down, Saya stated an order that left no room for questions. Your bodyguards stay here, Hayashi. Saya might not be a Konoha shinobi. Like her husband, she had no authority over Konoha shinobi. However, in her house, her word was law. Hayashi knew Saya enough to even think of saying no. He used Hyuga main family silent gesture number 6, what she said, and the 2 well-trained bodyguards disappeared. Saya nodded. Hayashi-kun, Weasel-kun. She said before disappearing in the darkness. Itachi didn't even flinch at the way he was addressed. It was another reason Saya was edgy around the 13-years-old Uchiha. Most of the time he didn't seem to have a sense of humor, or a personality. Hayashi was a bit disturbed. In all the times he had visited the Horazan couple, he had never been informed of the existence of this secret passage. He was painfully reminded of the many evenings he and his late wife spent with Saya and Shiki, chatting and laughing over sake, dango and strawberry tea. He also realized he hadn't visited the Horazan residence since his wife's death. The 2 bloodline limit wielders cautiously walked down the stairs. Even their notable dojutsus only helped in the darkness to a point. In fact, Hayashi hadn't even activated his white eyes. He did so as soon as he reached the bottom of the stairs, and the sight almost made him gasp. They were in a narrow passage that extended deep into the treacherous darkness, narrow enough for 2 adults to have trouble walking shoulder to shoulder. The walls, floor and ceiling were made of wood. However, the amazing thing was the thin vein-like tubes that traveled within the wood that made the passage. The entire place had a chakra circulatory system. The amount of chakra flowing through the pathways was nigh inexistent, only enough for Hayashi's Byakugan to detect its presence. Saya made the Torah seal and slammed both hands on the walls. Hayashi watched in amazement how the walls absorbed a small amount of Saya's chakra. He saw how it flowed through the walls. He noticed the diminutive torch-like protrusions emerging from the walls and how they were connected to the chakra veins in the walls. When Saya's flowing chakra reached one of them, they release a warm, yellow flame that lightened the passage. Saya returned Hayashi's amazed look with a childlike grin. Itachi, whose Sharingan had only shown him the tiny burst of chakra that preceded the appearance of the yellow flames, seemed just as impressed. Yeah, chakra-based illumination. We just cannot use oil or coal like normal people. We do it the neat way. She declared. How? That was the only word Hayashi managed to say. Saya turned her back to the males and began walking down the passage with a brisk pace. The 3 buildings were made by the first Hokage with his Mokuton Jutsus. He called them a token of his appreciation for our teachings and contributions to the foundation of Konohagakure no Sato. I can't tell you anything more, because I don't really know the specific techniques he used. Nothing more was said, mainly because there wasn't much time. The passage turned out to be a lot shorter than it had seemed at first glance. Saya opened a small wooden door at the end of the passage. Hayashi and Itachi read the 2 black kanji on a plaque nailed to the door, Mugan, silence, and the 3 entered an exact copy of a waiting room, the kind of which you would find in a hospital anywhere. Saya hastily crossed the room to a double door, with another 2 kanji, Kankai, relief. The final room was yet another thing that impressed and caught the interest of both Hayashi and Itachi. They noticed a pattern that had repeated itself on the walls ever since they had entered the initial passage. The walls, while wooden, didn't seem to be made of individual planks placed together to form a wall. These walls were one single large, smooth and flawless wooden surface. Same with the floor and the ceiling. Itachi quietly admitted that the first's bloodline limit was definitely a lot more useful than he had originally thought. While both Hayashi and Itachi had had the misfortune to see rooms like this one before, it wasn't any less impressive. Every single square inch of the walls, ceiling and floor was covered with seals. In fact, the floor had one of the most complex circular arrays any of the 2 had ever seen. Another use of the Torah seal and an infusion of Saya's chakra on the floor revealed 16 small bluish flames in a circular formation that provided the room's only illumination. It was a room intended for the most advanced medical procedures. Itachi was the first to notice a small drawer with thick scrolls, and a short desk next to it. A small squared cabinet with drawers rested on top of the desk. Saya opened the cabinet for a second, allowing Itachi to see the plethora of medical and surgical tools neatly stored and organized within. Hayashi, do I need to tell you what to do? Only then did Hayashi notice that Saya had dropped the kun at the end of his name. That meant she was serious, and not in a good mood. He gently placed Naruto's unconscious body on the center of the room, in the middle of the complex seal array. The blonde infant squirmed and shifted uncomfortably, as if he were having a bad dream. All right, you 2, out. Saya didn't even give them time to complain. I like my privacy. Besides, I felt my husband's presence approaching, and he's not alone. If I had to guess, I'd say Sandame is with him, and I'm sure he has a lot of questions for you. The 2 of you. The Hyuga and Uchiha's expression sharpened. They had just realized that their Hokage was probably in an even worse mood than Saya. Sit down in the waiting room, and think exactly what you're going to say. Saya advised before turning her back to them. Had anybody asked them, both Hayashi and Itachi would have agreed that such a youthful and lovely face shouldn't be capable of showing such a vicious expression. Hayashi nodded and walked away silently. Itachi hned before following. He had figured out Saya was making fun of him. He wasn't used to that. A chunin and two cats landed on an empty street. Hyuga Sendai was surprised by the fact the two cats easily followed him as he trekked from roof to roof. Then again, those were summoned mystical creatures. He wouldn't be surprised if they were actually faster than him. They were. You can leave us and go back to Hyuga Hayashi. The one Shiki called Shin spoke, as if reading his mind. He had been about to comment that, as Hayashi's bodyguard, he needed to return to him. Are you sure? Yes, no problem. You know the way, don't you? The chunin nodded. He knew the way to training area 69. Well then, I'm off. Thank you. The other cat, Chen, was it, which he had already identified as the perkiest of the two, exclaimed joyfully. Unlike her companion, Twin, she didn't seem to mind the rain. What she said. Shin muttered, and Sendai had to conceal a smile of amusement. He bowed. Never in his life had he imagined he'd bow to a pair of cats, one last time and disappeared. The quieter Shin spun around to look at her twin sister. Oh, well, it's pointless to search for clues here. Anything we could have found has been washed away by the rain. Chen smirked in the way only cats can. Way away ahead of you, Nei-chan, she said before sprinting to a dark alley a few yards away. The roofs of the neighboring houses offered some much-desired shelter from the rain. The dark alley was fairly dry when compared with the streets beyond. Loud and thin columns of water fell violently on the ground, but most of the place remained dry, if a bit humid. The attack took place here, Chen declared with a smug tone. Shin raised an eyebrow in an unfeline gesture. Really? And how would you know that, Miss Great Detective? Dunno, maybe because of the kunai over there? Shin felt like face-faulting. There was, indeed, a kunai lying on the ground like the most innocent of things. She moved closer, sniffing it and feeling it with her whiskers. It reeked of sweat. It reeked of blood. It reeked of Uzumaki Naruto. What kind of assassin leaves the killing weapon in the crime scene? Shin muttered. A really crappy one? Shin walked away from the weapon and shook her body in an attempt to dry her soaking fur. She meditated on what Hyuga Sendai had told them on the way there. A civilian couldn't have done it. From what the Hyuga kid said, the attack was just too savage. Unless it was a civilian with a few screws loose. Chen added her 2 cents. Shin growled. Her sister said the stupidest things, which made her feel worse when they actually made sense. Alright, so option A is a psychotic civilian. Now let's assume a ninja did this, okay? Okay. Okaway, so what kind of ninja screws up so badly? A really shut up. So, we're dealing with either the worst ninja ever, or something made our assassin wannabe make such a pathetic mistake. So, what's the plan? No matter how sucky our ninja is, the rain got rid of any trails. There must be at least the beginning of a trail here. The rain doesn't reach here, so there must be at least a scent. We follow it until it disappears, and from then we made a spiraling sweeping of the surrounding areas. Given that our suspect has already made a mistake, we can only hope he makes a second one. And, if the attacker happens to be your psycho civilian, the easier for us to catch him. What now, Chen? Why do you assume it's a man? Shin sighed. It's a matter of simplicity, Chen. Besides, do you see a woman doing something that brutal? It was Chen's turn to raise an eyebrow. One word for you, Anko. Shin meowed in annoyance. Okay, so Anko could do it. But she has no reason to want to kill Uzumaki. Chen rolled her eyes. What if Orochimaru somehow made it inside Konoha unnoticed? It isn't that hard, anyway, and is controlling Anko through her cursed seal. First, the Hokage and Shiki-sama suppressed that seal thing. Second, how in the Nibi's name do you come up with those ideas? Saya didn't need to be told of what happened from Hayashi or anyone else. What she needed to know, she'd find out herself. She'd leave the rest to her husband, the third Hokage, and everyone else. Her role was simple: make sure Uzumaki Naruto recovered. The first thing she had noticed was his eyes, of course. However, she needed to make sure there weren't other critical injuries of note. By the looks of it, it was a particularly savage assault. Fucking shit, the old monkey must be furious. Saya muttered to herself. She simply couldn't comprehend how someone could do something like that to a child, especially one who housed an incredibly powerful demon. She didn't know crap about seals, but she knew that unconscious kid with the cute whisker marks was no demon. Seriously, does Konoha have no common sense? They say he's the demon, yet they treat him like crap. Really, what the fuck? Saya shook her head in an attempt to regain her focus. Really, of all the way this night could be ruined. She said as she prepared a simple diagnosis jutsu to locate internal wounds. She had been surprised to see that the skin of his chest was smooth and flawless, as if he hadn't just been stabbed with a kunai dozens of times. A quick scan of her torso only increased the number of questions. Most traces of piercing damage had completely disappeared. She gathered more chakra under her hand and increased her concentration. The result was the same. It was as if nothing had happened. No, wait, what is? Saya found minuscule tears on his lungs and heart, but nowhere near as critical as a kunai stab. In fact. What the hell? She dispelled her jutsu. She needed a different technique. She used a jutsu that allowed her to follow flows of chakra within a living body. It was no Byakugan, but for diagnosis purposes it worked wonders. Oh, so that's how it is. It wasn't really the first time she worked on Jinchuriki, demon vessels. A few years before, she had supervised the birth of Tsunagekire's Jinchuriki, at the request of her former apprentice, Chiyo. It wasn't really something she agreed with, the whole sealing demons within human beings thing, but a job was a job. However, the boy in front of her had to be the most interesting patient she had ever dealt with. As a consequence, Saya's scientific side kicked in. Saya had detected two different kinds of chakra at work within the child. She easily inferred the second chakra source was the Kyubi's. She remembered the few details her husband had shared with her on the nature of the seal that imprisoned the demon fox within Uzumaki Naruto. The hack no Fuin Shiki allows for Kyubi's chakra to mix with Naruto's. The seal works as a filter of sorts, purifying the demonic chakra so that it can be usable by Naruto. But this is the demon's chakra, and as far as I know Naruto doesn't even know about the kitsune. While keeping the first jutsu, she invoked a second technique that allowed her to get an estimate of Naruto's chakra reserves. While keeping two diagnosis jutsus at the same time is not easy, it isn't beyond Saya's abilities. What she saw amazed her. Holy flying fuck. This kid is a monster. It took her a while to realize what she had just said. Sorry, kid. The unconscious Naruto didn't respond. But seriously, you have so much chakra it's not even funny. It only took her a few seconds to justify Naruto's monstrous chakra capacity. He has a minimal but steady flow of chakra extracted from the nine tails. His body, his chakra system and reserves have grown to adapt to the demon fox's presence. The seal uses Naruto's chakra to work. His chakra coils must be really thick. Thick coils. Rapid chakra circulation. Constant chakra stamina training, feeding the seal. Damn, even without taking into account the fox's chakra, this kid might have more reserves than all four Kages together. Give this brat a few wide area damage elemental jutsu and you have the day of reckoning on 2 feet. Heck, give him Taju Kage Bunshin and a minor elemental jutsu and, damn. Okay, so I have a living chakra battery. No, more like a dam. Nah, more like the fucking sun. That still doesn't explain the two chakras. Unless. Some minutes of analysis, more diagnosis, and watching the two chakras at work unveiled more amazing conclusions about the physiology of Uzumaki Naruto. While she waited, all of his wounds had healed. She hadn't lifted a finger to aid him in his recovery. Only his destroyed eyes remained unchanged. Saya talked to an inexistent audience. She liked to hear the sound of her sensei voice. Besides, making the whole speech would help her remember enough for when she registered all that information in written form. The kid's body has adapted to the presence of the nine-tailed demon fox. This was the whole point of sealing the demon in him, so it's an expected result. But this kid's developments are beyond amazing. Not only his chakra coils have grown, his muscles and veins are also larger than normal, in an unusual secondary effect of Naruto's overwhelming chakra capacity. His body is well-toned despite his blatant malnutrition and the lack of any proper physical training. Even after having stabilized, his heart rate is 150% greater than an average human's. So are his blood pressure and his breathing rate. His lungs, heart, liver and kidneys are slightly bigger than those of a child his age. His body is a highly efficient machine that generates greater amounts of energy when compared with the average human. His current diet is insufficient, and only his enhanced body has prevented his succumbing to hunger and exhaustion. Unfortunately, his bones do not seem to have been enhanced in the same way as his muscles, veins and internal organs. His bones are weak and can barely support the weight of his body. My suspicion is that the Kyuubi's chakra has protected Naruto's bones from fracture so far. However, Naruto's condition and special anatomy demand an immediate improvement of his daily diet. In addition to his notably overdeveloped anatomy and physiology and his extreme chakra reserves, Naruto also possesses an unnatural wound healing speed and efficiency, capable of disposing of minor wounds in less than 2 minutes and lesser severe wounds in a longer period of time. Clotting occurs in seconds. Vasoconstriction is practically instantaneous. His own chakra supplements the cleansing of the wound by burning damaged tissue, debris, and possibly even bacteria. Angiogenesis, the formation of new blood vessels from existing blood vessels, doesn't take more than half a minute. The formation of a new extracellular matrix doesn't take more than 20 seconds. The whole proliferative phase of wound healing doesn't take 40 seconds. It's just ridiculous. Naruto's unnatural regeneration cannot handle the most critical of wounds, like damage to internal organs, for example. However, I was surprised to see the Kyuubi's chakra handling what Naruto cannot. Basically, Naruto's superb natural regeneration handles the simplest wounds while the demon fox takes care of everything else. The fact that the demon fox protects Naruto's body implies that it cares about the vessel's well-being. My hypothesis is that the demon fears that Naruto's death might result in his own. I'll have to talk with Shiki about it. Saya realized that she would have a long talk with Hayashi, too. The man had carried Naruto the whole way there. He had to have noticed Naruto's ridiculously fast healing. She could only hope he had kept it a secret from Itachi and his bodyguards. The knowledge of Naruto's unusual capabilities had to remain a secret at least until it was properly discussed with the Hokage. I hope you don't mind, Kyuubi-san, but I'll take credit for your work for a while. She focused on the last matter at hand, Naruto's eyes. All skin and muscle damage was repaired by Naruto's natural fast healing. The damage to his internal organs was handled by Kyuubi. But his eyes remained untouched. She had seen the Kyuubi's chakra reaching to the brutally damaged eyes, but it quickly receded. She had seen it happen more than once. If it weren't a ridiculous idea, she'd have thought the Kyuubi was afraid of tampering with the damaged eyes. It had taken her a while to come up with a hypothesis that could explain the demon's chakra's unusual behavior. Apparently, the Kyuubi's assistance in Naruto's healing process requires conscious effort, whatever stands for chakra control and medical ninjutsu for a demon fox. Kyuubi can heal his own wounds, as clearly proved 7 years ago. Besides, when you're mostly made of raw demonic chakra, whatever that means, wounds aren't really much of a problem. In other words, Kyuubi can heal Naruto with his chakra because he knows how to heal his own body. This would also explain why Kyuubi was able to repair his heart and lungs but not his eyes. The structure of a fox's lungs and heart isn't radically different from a human's. The eyes, however, are a completely different matter. In conclusion, Kyuubi cannot heal Naruto's eyes because he doesn't know how to. Ne-chan? What is it, Chen? This isn't the mistake we were expecting him to make, right? Shin shot an odd glance at the very dead body sprawled on the ground on his right side in front of the two cats. The fact that despite being at the mercy of the harsh rain for who knows how long they could still sniff a faint trace of Uzumaki Naruto's scent could only mean that they were in the presence of the attacker. Or at least his dead body. What happened to him, Ne-chan? I wish I knew, Chen. Shin muttered as she made circles around the corpse, making tentative sniffs near his chest, his open mouth and his ears. She didn't recognize the face, so she guessed it wasn't an important or particularly notorious shinobi. At least he didn't belong to any important family. That's when she noticed the rat mask lying behind the body's back. Umbu. She muttered. Chen followed her sister and hissed when she noticed the mask. Oh, that's not good. If I had to guess, I'd say he was killed with some kind of poison. I can't see any wounds. Chen sniffed the man's open mouth, and then looked at the fairly large pool of rainwater gathered under his face. So what do we do now? Why haven't the ANBU found this yet? Chen, the ANBU isn't omnipresent. What's omnipresent? Shin sighed. It means the ANBU cannot be everywhere every time. Besides, there aren't as many of them patrolling tonight. They'll find it when a patrol shows up around here. That's why you have to go as fast as you can and get Saya-sama. She'll be able to figure out what killed this guy. All right. You said the magic word. Fast. Before Shin could say anything else, Chen disappeared, jumping from roof to roof at a speed that put most ninjas to shame. She looked at the dead body, then up at the rain that making a mess of her fur. She looked at the distance, but Chen had already disappeared. She sighed. I expect lots of petting after this, Shiki-sama. And that's what I figured out so far, Saru. Saya had just finished her exposure of the results of her diagnosis. After asking Itachi to keep an eye on Naruto in case he regained consciousness, something she doubted, but with Jinchuriki you never know, Saya shared her discoveries with the Hokage, her husband and the Hyuga clan leader. She guessed Hayashi already knew enough, hence it didn't really matter if he joined the discussion. Besides, watching his shifting expression as she described the many unnatural characteristics Uzumaki Naruto possessed beyond the entity that resided within him. She was glad to see Hayashi was smart enough to figure out just how good a shinobi Naruto could be if those natural talents of his were fully exploited. For an instant, she imagined Uzumaki Naruto with Hyuga eyes. The result was so ridiculous and wrong in so many levels she struggled not to laugh. Kekei Genkai? You don't need such things when you're Uzumaki Naruto. It was also good to see how Sarutobi's hardened expression relaxed as waves of relief alleviated his troubled heart. The Urazen couple knew the old Hokage wouldn't have been able to live with the blame had Naruto died. Yes, he was relieved. But he wasn't any less furious. Saya could see the flames of anger in his old eyes, and that excited her. Like her husband, she was sick and tired of watching a senile old coot being played like a fool by the council and the great clans. Unfortunately, Sarutobi's relief would never be complete. Saya had already mentioned the one troubling circumstance concerning Naruto's health. So, is that your final conclusion, Saya? Yes, Saru. Naruto's eyes are beyond repair. The attacker might as well have gouged them out completely. It doesn't really make a difference. And medical ninjutsu is not capable of regenerating an eye. I can't do it, nobody I know can do it. Saya added a few more words before the Hokage even think of the possibility. Tsunade can't, either. The Hokage released a long sigh. Hayashi stared at the wooden floor. Saya wondered what was in the clan leader's head. She wondered if he was trying to imagine a life without sight. She, correctly, guessed that for a Hyuga that must be pretty harsh. She didn't remember any cases of blind Hyugas, either natural or accidental. What about a transplant? Hayashi finally proposed, looking up of Saya, who returned the gesture with a sad smile. Well, normally I'd say that's the way to go, but... She wrinkled her nose. Shiki always found that gesture quite amusing, and cute, in a way. There are several issues with that. First of all, it's not like spare eyes are an available resource, unless you're willing to offer your daughter, Hayashi. Shiki slammed his right hand on his forehead. Sarutobi only shook his head. Hayashi would have expressed his opinion in more violent ways if he weren't as acquainted with Saya's occasional bouts of morbid humor. So he resorted to narrowing his gaze and directing a furious glare with a dip of killing intent. I'll take that as a no. You see, finding a suitable eye is in itself a royal hassle. And even if we had a suitable donor, who in Konoha would agree to offer his or her eyes to help Uzumaki Naruto? The Hokage sighed again. There it was, the harsh, cold truth. He couldn't help but feel the weight of failure on his shoulders, the pain and shame of not even being able to fulfill Yondame's last request. Hayashi only nodded and, for the first time, got a complete grasp of what it truly meant to be Uzumaki Naruto. In a way that not even the boy's visage, all bloodied and agonizing, had accomplished, Saya's words had opened his eyes. For that reason, he allowed himself to let go of the bindings of his position and prestige, if even for a second, by taking a line from Horazan Saya's book. Fuck. Saya smiled in response. Fuck indeed, Hayashi-kun. Now, in the remote case we found a suitable pair of eyes, I still have my doubts about performing the operation. Why? Her husband spoke for the first time since she emerged from the Kankai room. I've already made clear that the boy is not normal. Saya explained in her academic tone. His anatomy, physiology, heck, the brat basically has 2 chakra pools, one of them which he can't control because it belongs to a demon. The boy not only uses his ridiculous chakra pool to regenerate faster than any person in most medical jutsus, apparently the fox also lends him a hand. The truth of the matter is this, we don't know shit about how that kid's body truly works. We don't know what would happen if we implant him a new pair of eyes. As far as we know, the fox might decide he doesn't like them and make them go pop. Sarutobi and Hokage grimaced. Horazan Saya's way of speech was far more troublesome than her husband's. What I'm trying to say is, the seal protects Naruto's body and mind from the Kyuubi's rotten chakra. Emphasis on Naruto's. I doubt the benefit extends to transplants. I'm not saying a transplant isn't possible. I'm saying we have absolutely no fucking idea what would happen, and it's not like we can try a test run. Sarutobi felt glad he was sitting on an ample chair. He wished it were a bit more comfortable, though. His headache had reached a new peak, and his body begged him to rest, but he knew he wouldn't sleep at all that night. So there are no options. Saya shrugged. My opinion as the closest thing to a medicine we have here is that a transplant, while possible, would involve too many unknown variables. It's just not worth the risk. The kid's screwed. For life, unless Tsunade shows up and performs a miracle. The Sandame nodded with a grim expression. So what now? Now I remove what's left of his eyes before it gets nasty, and his nifty chakra will do the rest, accelerating the scarification of the empty sockets. The kid is tough, I tell you. Really, really tough. Once I do that, it won't be much longer before he regains consciousness. Good. I'd like to be there when he wakes up. Of course. Saya's expression finally softened, offering the wrinkled Hokage a compassionate look. Sarutobi then turned to Hayashi. Hayashi-san, I have a responsibility to stay, but I think you can return to your home. I'm sure you'd like to rest. It's been a harsh night for all of us. The Hyuga chief nodded. Certainly, too many things had happened in too little time. Hayashi wasn't used to such sudden maelstrom of events out of his immediate control. He was at the very least a bit unsettled and overwhelmed by it all. However, he was surprised to realize he was, in a way, glad he had been witness to it all. Of course, he'd prefer to the whole ordeal to never happen. But it happened, and he felt it was a good thing he, and in a secondary role, his daughter, had been part of it. It was a feeling he wasn't used to experiencing, a feeling people do not experience often, a feeling some people never experience at all. It was the feeling that he was in the presence of history in the making. But he was also aware that his role in that story, at least for that night, had been fulfilled. Then I shall take my leave. Hokage-sama. The Hokage tilted his head, waiting for Hayashi's words. I'd like to be kept informed of the progress, of the situation. Sarutobi nodded. He seemed almost glad for Hayashi's request. Of course. Shiki-sama. Saya-sama. Hayashi turned to the Horizon couple, who bowed to him in response. Have a pleasant good night, Hayashi-kun. Shiki said with his natural neutral gaze. Watch out for the rain, Hayashi-kun. With an inclination of his head, Hayashi turned away and departed, or at least he tried, until something, black, and furry, crashed on his face. Hee-hee-ha, that tickles. Chen giggled, referring to Hayashi's breath on her stomach. There was a long interval of utmost silence, while Sarutobi, Shiki and Saya processed the sight of Hyuga Hayashi standing in the middle of the waiting room with a cat sprawled on his face. Eventually, it was up to Hayashi himself to state the obvious. Do I have a cat on my face? It wouldn't have been half as hilarious had it been anyone but Hayashi. Well, Itachi would have been a close second. Sarutobi was a lot more collected. Then the Horizon couple, but he didn't do anything to hide his mirth. Shiki and Saya just howled in laughter. Fortunately for Hayashi, the Hyuga code of conduct forbids him from feeling anything remotely close to embarrassment. He waited a long minute for the three other people present to calm down, secretly thanking Kami Itachi wasn't around. Shiki grabbed Chen by her scruff and pulled her away from the Hyuga. Don't worry, Hayashi, a cat is fine too. Hayashi couldn't stop himself from frowning. What does that mean? I'm not really sure. Shiki turned to face the cat he still held by the loose skin on her neck. So, Chen, dear, what news do you have for me? Hold me and I'll tell you. Chen purred, and Saya raised an eyebrow. Shiki did indulge the Nikomata, and Chen proceeded to do her routine rubbing against Shiki's right cheek. Hey! Only I can do that. Saya complained, walking closer to her husband with every intention to pull the cat off her husband. Suck it, old hag. Okay, that's it, you're dead. Only Horizon Saya can feel jealously towards an overly pampered two-tailed cat. We're in the middle of something, you two. Shiki declared with a conciliating tone. Chen, would you mind? The cat complied after a rough lick on Shiki's cheek. We found him. Who? Who else? The attacker, the big bad guy, the evil mojo, the dash. Okay, I got it. Hayashi and Sarutobi looked at each other, then at the cat. It seemed Hayashi wouldn't leave just yet. Like that? So easily? The Hokage moved to get a better look of Chen's face. The cat grinned. Yep. He was a really crappy ANBU, if you ask me. Boo. All four humans exclaimed as one. Hayashi blinked and secretly hoped nobody heard him. He blushed, or did whatever stands for blushing for a Hyuga, when he noticed Saya's sly, gotcha, smirk. Yep, ANBU. Sarutobi's headache only got worse, and the fire in his eyes flared with renewed intensity. Maybe he hadn't asked Itachi enough questions. Where is he? Has he been already captured? Is he ready for interrogation? Chen shot an odd look at the Hokage. Shin-chan's with him, he doesn't need to be captured, and he's a little too dead for interrogation. It took all of them a while to fully understand what Chen had just said. Dead? The Hokage felt like a bucket of cold water had just been poured on him. An ANBU, one of his ANBU, had tried to kill Naruto, and now he was dead. Yep, dead. Kicked the bucket. Met the Shinigami. Became the Nibi's plaything — we get it, Chen. Shiki groaned. What the fuck doesn't describe what I feel right now. Saya complained. Seriously, monkey, what the fuck is wrong with your village? I've been asking myself the same thing for a while now. Sarutobi was tracing circles on his temples. Maybe he should ask Saya to take a look at his headache. How did it happen? Hayashi intervened before the discussion deviated through another tangent. Shin-chan has a theory, but we don't really know. But why do you ask me, anyway? Shiki-sama. What is it, Chen? I did my part of the deal. Pay the tribute. Shiki sighed and Saya shot daggers at the small Nikomata. Chen purred in delight when Shiki scratched a very special spot behind her ears. Ah, that's the spot. Sarutobi sweat dropped. Hayashi used the trademark Hyuga response for absurdities, raising an eyebrow. The Horazan male offered an apologetic look to his wife. At least they don't ask for human sacrifices. A hand faster than an untrained eye reached for the leg holster. Click. Holster is opened. Swish. Two fingers reach for the contents within. Thump. Click. A flick of the middle finger closes the holster. All this in an instant. Pakin. The sound of sin. Munch. Munch. Choco banana. Gulp. It disappears. A blink. For an instant, Uchiha Itachi dispels his mask and reveals his satisfaction. Yes, Paki is heaven. Uchiha Itachi is not a man that mixes business with pleasure. That would be anathema to his entire modus operandi. However, watching over an unconscious brat is below Itachi's definition of work, even if the aforementioned brat has the strongest of the tailed beasts sealed within him. So, he decided he could afford to indulge in his personal Shangri-La. One of his arms might be busy holding the biscuit stick, but the rest of his body focused his attention of the body lying unconscious in front of him. Itachi stood with his feet barely touching the tip of Naruto's head. That way he could keep an eye on both Naruto and the only means of entrance to the room. He'd prefer to sit down or at least rest on his knees, but his duty was to watch over the blonde. While he doubted anyone would attempt an attack on Naruto, he doubted anyone would even be able to find Naruto in that place. He always took his job seriously, not taking Paki into account. Itachi is not a mysterious person. It's just that nobody has put enough serious effort into deciphering his personality. Once you understand he is the product of an inexistent childhood and the unreasonable demands of an entire clan of stuck-up envious arrogant bastards who expect too much from any member of the family that stands slightly above the Uchiha norm, which is already expected to be far superior to the average norm, it becomes easy to understand why Itachi is the way he is. It is certainly fortunate geniuses do not appear on a regular basis, not even amongst the mighty Uchiha clan. Of course, when all Uchihas are supposed to be geniuses, a genius among the geniuses is definitely something else. Indeed, Uchiha Itachi is worthy of his reputation. Not every day you see a 12-year-old ANBU. He had only joined the ANBU 4 months ago and he was already assigned to lead squads every once in a while, like that night. He knew that, unless something extraordinary happened, he would be an official squadron leader in less than a year. Besides, what could possibly go wrong? Itachi isn't an ambitious person, at least not in the normal sense. He didn't really make any particular effort to become the top genin graduate at 7, Chunin at 10 and ANBU at 12. He did what was expected from him, and his accomplishments are the consequence of his immense natural talents. He liked being a shinobi. He was born to be a shinobi. He couldn't imagine himself doing anything else. But, other than that, little else mattered to Uchiha Itachi. Uchiha Itachi. Shinobi. That was his mantra, his essence of self. His everything. He was an empty existence, someone who simply existed. In that respect, he wasn't any different from Uzumaki Naruto. He lived, looking for a sense of purpose, a beacon that told him what he was supposed to do. Uchiha Itachi felt incomplete. Worst of all, he wasn't completely aware of that. He welcomed the unusual change of pace that night had brought to his life, courtesy of Uzumaki Naruto. The boy slept peacefully. To Itachi's eyes, the blonde would have been the perfect image of peace if he didn't know the macabre truth hidden behind Naruto's eyelids. From what little Horizon Saya had told him before she shooed him out of the waiting room and locked him with the unconscious demon vessel, Naruto was in perfect condition, sans the total loss of his sight. Uchiha Itachi had to admit, the current situation was not within his expectations. Maybe you should have died. He mused, his emotionless gaze digging holes on Naruto's face. It might have been the best for everyone. Yourself included. Itachi knew. That kid, no matter how much he struggled, wouldn't have the life he desired. Naruto would leave his life watching his back in every moment, keeping an eye on those that were after the creature he contained, whether to kill it or to pretend to use it. Itachi knew that better than anyone in Konoha, except maybe the 4 people beyond the operation room's wooden double doors. 1 second of fluid motion, a second stick of Paki in his hand. It was ridiculous, the villagers' treatment of the Jinchuriki. Or at least that's what Itachi thought. If they truly think he's the demon, why do they treat him like Konoha's pariah? If he truly were the demon, they should treat him with respect. Respect born of fear, true, but respect nonetheless. You don't insult and ignore someone who, seal and everything aside, has the power to reduce you to your elemental particles in an instant. It's common sense. Something Konohagakure apparently needed in vast amounts. Adding to that the Hokage's law that prohibited any mention of the 9 tails, and Itachi would expect Naruto to have been allowed the closest thing to an ordinary life he could possibly receive. In fact, beyond the insults, the curses and the harsh words, few people actually dared getting too close, and too physical, with the boy. Most people actively ignored him and avoided him. However, Itachi thought, that might be the reason the assassination attempt actually worked, except for the fact Naruto didn't die, of course. The attack was a success because nobody in Konoha with a sane frame of mind would dare attempt to put an end to Uzumaki Naruto's life. With a single thought, Itachi solved the mystery of the assassination attempt on Uzumaki Naruto. Of course, he wasn't really solving anything, since it wasn't a mystery to him in the first place. Just by looking at the unconscious boy, Itachi thought about the sheer stupidity of it all. How could anyone think that kid was a demon? He wouldn't even need 2 seconds to break Naruto's neck. Really, he'd only need to extend his hand a bit and... Whatever you are thinking right now, please stop it. Itachi blinked. He hadn't felt anyone enter the room. That's not normal. He is Uchiha Itachi. He doesn't make those mistakes. Had he been so immersed in his thoughts? Looking down at his arms, he saw another thing that surprised him. His right arm was closing in on Naruto's neck. When did I? He quickly decided to blame this quite aberrant trail of mistakes on stress. Deciding that remaining silent would only make things worse, he quickly turned to face Saya, wife of Horazan. I do not dash. Saya's closed eyes caught Itachi's attention. Could it be? You fear my Sharingan? Saya couldn't tell if Itachi's voice was smug or disappointed. That unnerved her. However, she knew she had to give him an honest answer. Don't get me wrong, Itachi-kun, she said, opening her eyes only to lower them to look at the Uchiha's feet. You can't blame me for avoiding something that can trap me in a genjutsu in the blink of an eye. It's simple survival instinct. But I do not fear the Sharingan, Itachi-kun, and I definitely do not fear you. I have fought the Sharingan before. I have defeated the Sharingan before. I can do it again. Of course, Saya would never admit that she was painfully aware that it was a matter of time before Itachi surpassed her. Yes, she knew just how talented the genius Uchiha truly was, and just how much stronger he would become. Horazan Saya is no psychic, but she has a good eye for those things. Now, out. I have work to do, and Hokage-sama wants to speak with you. We found the culprit. Itachi didn't even blink. If there was something he knew, it was hiding his emotions. So soon? Yeah, we're that good. Now, out. Drip. 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 The sound of water falling, drop by drop. In the darkness, it was his only company. Drip. 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 The sound was faint, but, in the darkness, it might as well be a sledgehammer. It made no difference. Drip. 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 The painfully slow staccato was his everything. There was nothing else but him, and the drops. Drip. 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 He didn't even feel his body. He just was. Drip. 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 The sound was everything. Every single time a drop of water hit the ground, it felt like a hammer descending on his forehead. It wasn't painful, or maybe it was and he just didn't care anymore. It was definitely annoying. Drip. 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 Having nothing else to do, he focused on the sound. Then, he recognized the sound as water dropping on water. When he realized there was water on the ground, he became aware of his own soaked state. With the awareness of wetness, came the awareness of existence. I am wet, therefore I am. With the aware of his existence came the awareness of his discomfort. Basically, he felt like crap. There was no pain, though, only annoyance. He felt dirty, wet and tired. He felt so heavy the sole idea of trying to move was quickly discarded in a bout of simplistic conformism. He didn't want to open his eyes, there wasn't even a reason to. He should have been alarmed at the fact that his memory felt like a forest shrouded in mist on a dark moonless night, his memories being the trees. He knew they were there, but finding a specific one was impossible, and he kept stumbling into ideas, sights, perceptions and impressions. He saw pain, he heard blood, he smelled agony, he tasted evil, he felt the voice of a girl. His memories and his senses merged and mixed, the boundaries of perception and reality torn apart by a torn soul and a fragile psyche. He knew the last thing he remembered before falling, unconscious, asleep was a man, but he couldn't for his life figure out who. Truth be told, he didn't feel that bad. He wasn't sure why, but he felt like he should feel worse. His conclusion was that he could handle worse. Yes, always the optimistic one. Even when life sucked so badly. When he reached that conclusion, he decided it was time to open his eyes. How was he supposed to know he wouldn't like what he'd see? So, he opened his eyes. The moment he did that, he knew he should have kept them closed. Something washed over him, something invisible and intangible, but its presence was obvious, all over him like some sort of scalding, stinking sludge. He knew his immediate reaction should be hurrying to get up and get rid of the viscous thing that was slowly burning his skin, but something else pinned him on the floor. It wasn't just his tiredness. He knew what it was because, despite the memory being blurry and fragmented, he knew exactly what he was experiencing. Fear. But it wasn't any of the forms of fear he knew. It wasn't anywhere close to his fear of the milk he had struggled to buy turning to be spoiled, or the fear of maggots in his meat, the fear of rotten eggs or the fear of the dark when the electricity of his measly apartment failed, which happened a bit too often. It wasn't like the, well-concealed, fear of some of villagers with the most creative threats suddenly becoming true to their normally empty words. No, this was something of the likes of nothing he had ever experienced before. It was a more fundamental form of fear, something that tugged at the most basic and primal elements of his existence, at the 90-something% of his genes that are identical to those of any other animal life form. The conflicting emotions threatened to rip into his mind as his overwhelming desire to run away conflicted with his just as overwhelming to close his eyes and pretend there was nothing out there. Pretend he was nothing. His body screamed, his mind said no. His mind screamed, his body said no. He didn't know anymore. Body, soul, mind, heart, spirit, they all felt like disparate, scattered entities and he just didn't know anymore. Once again, he doubted his own existence, or maybe he concluded he was nothing but fear, a mangled, formless, pathetic mass of pure fear. He remained there, wherever he was, his eyes fixated on the lone eye that stared down at him. Of course, he didn't fail to notice that the eye was probably as large as himself. He was too stunned to even wonder why he could only see one eye, and he was too much of a mess to conclude it was because of his position and the angle from which he was looking up. There was only him, whatever he was, whatever he had become, whatever that thing had turned him into, and the eye. The eye that seemed to be made of living flame and the small, feral, inhuman black pupil that stared down at him as if it could kill him with just a look. And maybe it could. However, terrified as he was, paralyzed as he was, exhausted as he was, confused as he looked up. He never looked away. The eye looks down at him, so he would look at the eye. It was better than the endless darkness. It was the only thing besides the endless darkness. Hoping that his expression manages to relay the miserable sapling of emotion he feels, he looks up, challenging the eye with one last bout of determination. After all, there's something Uzumaki Naruto has, it's boundless determination. The eye shifted in amusement, respect, irritation, delight, outrage, an unreadable motion. Naruto felt the core of his soul freezing, shaking and cracking as the eye slowly descending closer and closer to him. Naruto closed his eyes when light, not darkness, claimed him. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Guys, make sure to help the author by visiting the link in the description. This is Fox Sage, and I'm signing off.